Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. I am honored to have with us Seth Goldstein from California, who has so much to share with us today, from having a background in child abuse and in the prevention and protection of children, having been a police officer and now an attorney. And I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for doing this with me.
Oh, the pleasure is mine.
Great. Well, let's start with just sharing a little bit of the specifics of your background. How did you just tell us how you got into this?
Kicking and screaming. I was a juvenile officer at one point, and the responsibilities for the function of a juvenile officer were twofold. One is to try to prevent children from becoming further involved in the criminal justice system. And the other was to investigate child abuse and cases where children were hurt. And what I found in both areas is that in the 1970s, when I was assigned to this particular function in the city of Berkeley, where kids were, for the most part, running to Berkeley as a place both for a safe haven, because of the liberal atmosphere and places for them to hang out with the kinds of street things that were going on. Kids were turning tricks on Telegraph Avenue. They were involved in child prostitution by pedophiles who would pick them up at the various places where these things were going on. And as a diversion officer working with kids who were either had committed an offense and then we were trying to keep them out of the justice system, I found that the runaways that were running away from it at home. So we had and this was a time when the word pedophile wasn't even in the American lexicon, for one thing. And secondly, law enforcement at that time really looked at these kind of cases as an aberration, that it didn't happen very often. And you could easily recognize these people because of the way they looked and the things that they did.
Right.
So it was an eye-opener. I belong to an association of juvenile officers throughout California, where we became very concerned about some of the things that were happening. One of my kids who was diverted ended up being a victim of the Hillside Strangler in Los Angeles.
Oh, goodness.
And so the network at that point, underground network, became something that was really very frightening for us as people who were trying to protect children, finding that it was international in some ways and happening right under our noses. I kept getting calls from civil lawyers saying, gee, how do you do that? Can you help me in my case? And the very first case that I was asked to testify as an expert in was a family law matter. And I've learned from the process that family lawyers have no clue about what sexual abuse is or how to gather evidence. And then once they got the evidence, what it means.
Right.
And in the process, both because I was working with the state of California in trying to create protocol. I helped write the guidelines for investigation, initial guidelines for investigation of child abuse and sexual abuse in particular for law enforcement. The dependency courts, that's where juvenile courts work to protect children. Their sole focus is on what's best for the child and how to resolve the issues with parents. For the large part, juvenile courts were created around the idea that if abuse occurred, such as physical abuse or emotional abuse, that you could redirect the parents. And then once they've learned a better way to parent their children, as opposed to hurting them, either physically or emotionally, then they would reunify. Well, that also spilled over into the area of child sexual abuse. And the difficulty with sexual abuse is that it has such a wide spectrum of motivations in terms of the reasons why people commit these offenses. Reunification isn't always the right choice. And California eventually, through some of the work that I did as well as others, created criteria that courts would then use to determine when it was inappropriate for reunification, given the fact that there was a significant risk to the child, were that child to be placed back in the environment in which the abuse occurred. So the juvenile court also, because its focus is solely on protection of the child against the world, the issue then becomes how to best handle cases. And as a result, evidence law and procedures in the juvenile courts are very different from those in the criminal courts and in the family court. So the question then becomes how to best deal with the same kind of issues that arise in the family court. Well, the problem with the family court is, first of all, you're not entitled to a lawyer. Children are not entitled to lawyers. It's driven by people who essentially have to pay for the services that they get, a lawyer, an expert, a therapist. And now there's this industry that's been created around, and I think all in well-meaning, I think they all intended to do something that's best for children, to try to make the kind of system that works in the juvenile dependency court of reunifying children back to families where abuse has occurred is essentially the edict that judges must follow. So the problem, of course, where you have something that's driven by, in essence, the ability of a person to litigate, then there are going to be inequities. There's an imbalance, both because of the power dynamics that come from family units.
Do reform in a way or an approach that would really make this system better for the protection of children in these kind of end of spouses and end of parents. What do you think that reform needs to be, or
Well,
judges
I
should
think
do?
it so happens I'm right now working with a number of professionals, two judges and two mental health professionals, in preparing an article of talking about how the focus needs to change from the rights of the parents and their equal time and the other presumptions that have to do with how custody should be shared, to focusing solely on the child, using some of the dependency theories and procedures, as well as evidentiary rules, to focus solely on that child as the subject of the custody dispute, which is unfortunately, I think, misperceived, as parents are the ones who really should be talking about and the judges should be talking about how the parents share this child, as opposed to what's best for the child in that thing. So I think that's the key factor. And I think the other is that the courts need to have the resources that are successfully used and utilized in the other forums. Dependency courts have counselors and have psychologists and have procedures which are intended to protect the children directly. Criminal courts have evidentiary rules which allow for certain kind of evidence that might necessarily be excluded otherwise, as do the dependency courts, and those need to be adapted to mold the system to a way that's best to protect the kids, and to have the resources of a team of people who can come around whose only responsibility is to represent kids.
Sometimes I hear attorneys or courts say, even when there's really good evidence of violence against a parent, okay, so it's like the mom and the dad have had a conflict, or mom and mom, whatever it is, but let's just say mom and dad, a mom and a dad have had a conflict, and maybe it's ongoing for years, that there's even founded abuse on that mother, okay? And I hear a lot in court, well, we have no proof that the kid was even part of that. Like, didn't affect the kid. This is just between the parents. Now we're getting divorced, and so yay, they shouldn't be married anymore. Obviously, they don't do well together, but now we can go into two different homes and it didn't affect the kids. In your work, is that true that a kid is like really that isolated? I mean, the kid was sleeping, the kid didn't experience it. Do you find that to be like highly unlikely that a
Well,
kid?
that's what um, research shows that where a child is abused in a family environment, that there's a likelihood that the other parent is being abused as well. The percentages vary from 30 to 70%. If the mother is abused, there's an inverse, not an inverse, but a potential relationship of what's called comorbidity, that the child's being abused. So this again is one of those things that it's taken a long time for the family courts to finally recognize that they have to screen for every case, whether interpersonal violence has occurred. That's domestic violence in its new lexicon.
What did you call it? Intimate partner violence?
Well, either interpersonal or intimate partner violence, either way.
Okay.